advocacy groups. And the first one is 50-50, represented by Fiona Buckley. Second one is Women for Election, represented by Niamh Gallagher. And the third one is the National Women's Council of Ireland, represented, interestingly, by Eoin Murray. So we have 20 minutes between the three, and I invite Fiona to kick off.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I wish to thank the chairperson and the conveners of the Constitutional Convention for the invitation to address you today. Just before I go into my pitch, I just want to, give some background information about the 50-50 group. The group is a single-issue national advocacy group dedicated to achieving equal representation in Irish politics. We were created in late 2010. We are politically non-aligned and fully inclusive, welcoming both men and women as members. The group is run by a team of very dedicated volunteers in a number of branches nationwide, and I suppose we believe that the underrepresentation of women in Irish politics is an affront to the democratic ideals of justice and equality, and our vision is to seek gender parity in Irish electoral politics. So to the statistics. I suppose just a stark statistic to begin with. This year, the state is celebrating its 91st birthday. In that time, just 91 women have ever been elected to Dáil Éireann, an average of one woman TD for each year of the state's existence. We believe this is an abysmal record. Currently, there are just 25 women in the Dáil, representing a record percentage high of 15%. Thinking of the statistic, I suppose, in another way, it shows that the Dáil has always been at least 85% male, making Ireland a country that has been and continues to be overly represented and dominated by male voices and perspectives. Indeed, this, I suppose, if we were to review the demographic of the Cabinet, which is the core decision-making organ of the government, we see the, overrepresentation of men again. Of the 181 people who have been appointed to the Cabinet since 1922, 169, or 93%, have been men. I suppose the underrepresentation of women is not simply confined to the national level. At the local level, just 16% of councillors are women. The statistic is particularly worrying. The academic literature speaks a lot about political pipelines and advises that becoming a local councillor is critical to one's chances of being elected, of being selected, I suppose, for general elections, as it allows an individual to develop the political base and experience necessary to be viewed as a credible candidate. It is especially essential for women, as research demonstrates that when women enter the political pipeline through involvement in local government, they are statistically more likely than men to win a Dáil seat. However, with such low numbers of women in local government, this is feeding through to an underrepresentation of women at the national level. And if you're thinking to yourself, what's the big deal? Sure, women are underrepresented in politics worldwide. Surely Ireland isn't unusual in this regard. Well, yes, women do continue to be underrepresented in politics worldwide. But over the past 10 to 15 years, other countries have made concerted efforts to increase the numbers of women in politics, leaving Ireland to occupy the lower rungs of global league tables in relation to women's political representation. Currently, we are in 89th ranked position out of 133 rankings in the Interparliamentary Union's global league table of women's parliamentary representation. So why is the underrepresentation of women in Irish politics a concern? The 50-50 group believes that as a core principle of democracy, the composition of the Oireachtas and other public bodies needs to reflect population diversity. This is necessary to ensure that their decisions have legitimacy. But I suppose the question is, what is preventing women from accessing politics? Research on the underrepresentation of women in politics speaks about the theory of supply and demand to explain women's participation in politics. The theory goes that women must supply themselves for politics, but that supply must be met with a corresponding demand by parties to select women candidates. Of course, supplying oneself to a career in politics is conditioned by the availability of or lack of certain resources, namely political experience, time, money and networks, as well as motivational factors such as interest, confidence and ambition. Demand is influenced by the opportunity structure in a given constituency, such as the number of seats available, as well as any vacancies that would be coming up, the selectors' own attitudes and their perceptions of the type of candidates voters prefer. In an Irish context, much has been spoken about the 5 C's of care, culture, cash, candidate selection and confidence. Those 5 C's have had a significant impact on the supply and demand of women candidates in Irish elections. Firstly, in relation to care, there is still a bias towards traditional gender roles in Ireland. In 2011, 500,000 women were looking after home family compared to 9,600 men. The basic fact of the matter is that women with children, whether they work in politics or elsewhere, are faced with many choices about their working and caring roles, choices that men don't always face. Secondly, the low representation of women in Irish public life has owed much to a historically conservative and patriarchal culture, which placed women firmly in the private or domestic sphere. Thus, Irish political culture is shaped by masculine norms, advantaging, men's access to politics. Thirdly, the male breadwinner model generated by aforementioned traditional structures has contributed to increasing women's economic vulnerability. Men are expected to be the hunters and gatherers, women the carers and nurturers. In December, an OECD report showed that Irish women aged 25 to 44 with children take home 14% less in their pay packets than men of a similar age profile with children. With less cash at their disposal to mount an election campaign, many women hesitate to seek a nomination to run in the first place. Fourthly, candidate selection processes are considered most crucial to improving the parliamentary representation of women. The norm in democracies is for political parties to act as gatekeepers in that they recruit election candidates. The demographic homogeneity of the Dáil may influence the views of the selectorate, preferring instead to stick with the male candidate and be hesitant about breaking the status quo. And finally, the issue of confidence. A lot of women have the ambition and interest to go for politics, but may not have the confidence to put themselves forward. And I know Niamh is going to pick up on that in a moment. But what can be done to address the underrepresentation of women in Irish politics? Much has already been spoken about the Electoral Amendment Political Act, and this was signed into law by President Michael D. Higgins in July of last year. The Act ensures that women comprise 30% of party candidates in the next general election. The figure will increase to 40% thereafter. Parties that do not comply with the provisions of the Act will see their state funding cut in half. Significantly, the Act received widespread cross-party support in the Oireachtas. Fundamentally, the 50-50 group believes that the Electoral Amendment Political Funding Act 2012 provides an appropriate mechanism for addressing the issue of the underrepresentation of women in Irish politics. Such a measure will compensate for the many structural barriers, such as the 5 C's, that women encounter when deciding to enter politics, thus levelling the political playing pitch for all. A lot has been spoken about today already about Article 41.2, and again, the 50-50 group recommends amending this article to reflect a broader statement about the importance of care work done by men and women in Ireland. There needs to be a constitutional recognition of the need for reconciliation of work and care duties in Irish gender politics, including the role of men and their participation in the family life, as is currently the case in Northern European gender policies. Also, the text of the Constitution is a product of its foundations in patriarchal times. Currently, there is much use of the masculine pronoun, particularly in relation to the role of presidency, which is quite ironic considering we've had 2 very successful women presidents, as well as there's a lot of references to terms such as chairman. In the late 1990s, the Constitutional Review Group noted that Bunreacht na hÉireann, like most constitutions, is insensitive on the issue of gender and invariably presumes that office holders will be male. We in 50-50 strongly recommend that gender inclusivity should be a guiding principle observed in the wording of the Constitution. I'm now going to hand over to Niamh Gallagher of Women for Election.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to address you on this issue. My name is Niamh Gallagher and I'm co-founder of Women for Election. Women for Election is a non-partisan, issue-neutral organisation to inspire and equip women to succeed in politics. And I suppose just to say a word about why and how Women for Election was set up. In 2009, myself and my partner in setting this up, Michelle O'Donnell Keating, were travelling around Ireland on a grassroots campaign around European issues, trying to engage women's voices in this particular debate around Europe. And we met thousands of women. We were in every single county in Ireland. We ran about 60 events, and we spoke to groups of 10 or 15 women sitting around in a small school hall, right up to 300 women in a huge town hall for the Irish Country Women's Association county meet. And at each of these events, the conversation nearly always went the same way. It started out talking about the issues relating to Europe and Irish women's role in Europe, both in the past and looking towards the future. And then it got on to, what about women in politics? Because all of us, whether we were 15 women on the day or whether we were 300, had come out to talk about this very political issue, Irish women in Europe, and yet, as many of the women said, but we're not involved, we're not members of parties, we're not active, we're not out there campaigning on political issues. And yet actually talking about it here and now, we are political because we care about all these very issues that we're talking about here today, and we're passionate about making changes in our communities. So Michelle and I asked, why not? If these are issues that are important to you, why are you not active in political life out there? Why is your face not on the poster? And the response again was always the same. Sure, what would I do? How would I get involved? I don't know. Especially in rural areas, there was an issue around I couldn't go down and join the party. Everyone would be looking at me. I know everybody and they know me and they know my husband, and I'm just not sure how to make that next step. The other piece that came up really strongly was, sure, what would I have to add? What relevance is my experience to politics? What difference could I make given my own background? And this was the bit that really, really shocked us, because these are the women. You're talking about the head of the local guild, the Irish Country Women's Association, the woman running the local residents association, the network group, the shop steward in a trade union, the head of the local chambers of commerce. I could go on and on and on, but these were women who were so political and they were so active in their community, and yet they couldn't see how their leadership at local level transferred into political life, and they couldn't see the transferability of the very skills that they had into politics. And yet those are the skills, and any of the elected women in the room here today will say it, that you need if you're going to get into politics locally and nationally. So I suppose Michelle and I, reflecting on that, we wanted to change that dynamic. We wanted to do something that would help and support and inspire those women who were leaders locally to demonstrate that leadership in politics at local and at national level. And we would always say that's how Women for Election came about. It was in response to demand from the women that we met around this country who said, I want to get more active. I want to bridge from interest to action, but I don't know what to do next. So what we're doing essentially is trying to provide training, mentoring and support programmes to women who are interested in getting more active in politics, and support them to take that next step, whether it is to canvass at the next election or to be a candidate for the European Parliament. It doesn't matter. It's about that next step, because Fiona mentioned the pipeline. We're not going to get more women elected just through measures up at the top level. It's about supporting women at every stage of that political interaction. But the second thing I want to say is really the point about who cares, because, what does a rational person like me with a normal salaried job give up their job to set up a social enterprise like Women for Election and take the risk that is involved in that? Because I really believe that if we did have balance in our politics, and if we did have men and women around the table making decisions, that we as a country would come to better decisions, and that actually the outcomes that we would see for all of us, men, women, girls and boys, would be better and would be more positive. And that's, anyone here can say anecdotally from their own experience around your tables here, but whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's in community life, when you've got a mix around the table, you generally have a better discussion and you get a better outcome. It's just common sense. That's always been my gut feeling, and I suppose that's the driver. But I'm glad to report that evidence supports that gut feeling. There's been a huge amount of international research into this. What difference does it make if you get more women elected? Because, to be honest with you, That's what we want to know as voters and as citizens. How does it affect me? Why should I care? And there are 4 things: process, policy, priorities and power, that I think make that are strong arguments for this issue. On the process side, evidence shows that women conduct politics in a more open and transparent way to their male counterparts. They're more likely to work across party lines to reach a decision and to get something across the line that is of common interest. On the transparency piece, that can be really practical things, like putting the minutes of meetings up on their website, being open about who they're meeting with, and bringing groups from outside the political process into the council chamber or into the Dáil to open that up to new groups. On the policy side, the evidence does show that women are more likely to focus on social, family and welfare issues and issues of relevance to women's equality. Those are kind of issues like welfare and healthcare and education are of relevance to everybody, men, women, boys and girls. This isn't just a women's issue thing. Power. Women have a different approach to power because they traditionally haven't accessed it through the same routes as men. And so they're inclined to build up these new coalitions of interest in order to get there and to get elected and make it to the top. And I can see many of the women in the room again today who have done just that. In getting elected, they have not done the traditional thing like join the local Chamber of Commerce, be very active in the local GAA, whatever it might be. Instead, they have gone out there on an issue that matters to them and built coalitions of interest in their community around issues that people are passionate about, got those people behind them and worked with them to get elected. So that opens it up for all of us. And on priorities, some Irish evidence shows that women actually spend more time on constituency casework than their male counterparts. So, as a voter, maybe makes more sense to support a woman. But I think that evidence proves that if we want better outcomes on policy and in how our politics is conducted, we should be seeking balance. And I would just ask all of you in considering and in your deliberations today to think about how can our constitution be a better vehicle for ensuring that we have a better quality politics and better policy outcomes for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for the invite to come here today. It's a really exciting day. And congratulations to all of you, because I think, and this is going to touch on what I talk about for the next few minutes, I think coming here over the next few months and dedicating your time, your energy, your effort is an amazing and an enormous act of citizenship. It's hugely giving. It's embracing not just the right that you have as a citizen to have your voice heard, but also the positive responsibility to take part, to make a difference, and to shape how our society is governed and how our society is viewed around the world as well as at home. And I was struck while I was researching my speech by the words of some of you may know him, the Connemara poet and mystic John O'Donoghue, and he has an invocation for citizenship, and I thought that maybe it would be appropriate just to read you a couple of lines from it, particularly for today in today's discussion. He says, "Awaken your spirit to adventure, hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Come to kneel down before the poor and discover what we do to turn our anxiety into righteous anger and find our way home." So, as the chairman already alluded, I'm here representing the National Women's Council of Ireland, and you heard from my colleague Orla O'Connor this morning, my colleague and my boss, I should say. And we represent 160 organisations, women's organisations around Ireland. We also work with men's groups, so we don't need to talk about that today. And the things that I'm about to say have come from our AGMs, where we set policy every year, but also a special consultation process that we took with members from all over the country on a couple of different days about these issues. The groups include groups like the ones here to my left, but they also include the Irish Women Lawyers Association, the Irish Country Women's Association, Women in Technology and Science. So there's a huge diversity in experience that is brought to the table. But before I go into exactly the contents of my speech, I just say that one of the most influential people in terms of my own political views was my grandmother. And I never met her. She died a couple of years before I was born, but I have very strong memories of sitting with my dad and looking at the memorabilia and the medals that she got from her time in Cumann na mBan. And as some of you probably know, The leader of Cumann na mBan was a great Irish women politician. We had a gentleman here who was naming some of them earlier on, and her name was Constance Markievicz. And amazingly enough, she was the second ever woman cabinet minister in all of Europe from April 1919 until 1922. What's pretty startling, I think, is that more than 50 years after she died, more than 2 years after my grandmother died, and just a year after I was born, was the next time we had another woman in the cabinet. And in fact, it was a junior minister appointment. It was Maura Geoghegan Quinn. That means that for a very long time in Irish society, 51% of the population, women, were not in the room when crucial decisions were being made about our country. And I would draw 3 lessons from that. First of all, very simply, that we need more women in the rooms where decisions are being made, whether they are political or other aspects of public life. Second of all, that we shouldn't assume that it's only politics and government where power lies, that people have a power, that people, when they organise and come together and express views about their country, just as you are doing here, that is a very powerful thing to do. And third of all, that we should seek to take some of the power that politicians have and give it back to ordinary people. If Fiona discussed the why not and Niamh discussed the why we should, I'm going to talk a bit about the how do we get more women in politics. And I was very struck and actually a little bit disappointed by the discussion that you just had. I would be very sad if all we did today here was talk about quotas. I think the only limit on how we encourage more women to get involved in politics and public life is a limit on our imagination. So be brave, as John O'Donoghue said, be open to all sorts of different ideas in your discussions. When Constance Markievicz was elected to the first Dáil, the programme of the first and the second Dáil set out 3 core values for society, and they were liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, we might update the last one to make it solidarity, so it's a bit more gender neutral in light of your discussions this morning. But the members of the National Women's Council said that they would like to see 2 other values expressed in our Constitution. The first of those is the idea of participation, and the second is the idea of diversity. So what do I mean by participation? Well, more or less what I said at the start, that citizens have the rights and the responsibility to take an active part in the decisions. Not just that they're consulted or that an opinion poll company asks them what their views are and then a decision is taken somewhere else, but that they're actually in the rooms where decisions are being taken, or that they're given the power to vote. This isn't a new idea in Irish society. In 1921, in the constitution that was established in the Free State, there was a direct democracy provision where citizens were given the power to initiate legislation or to block legislation. In fact, Kevin O'Higgins said that in a country where the traditional attitude of the people is to be against the law and against the government, it's extremely important that you give citizens as many provisions and as much power as possible in order to do that. It might be a surprise, or it might not be a surprise, that when the all-party group on the Constitution met to discuss this, they pretty much dismissed the idea out of hand. And that group was made up mostly of politicians who presumably, at least on the basis of what I've seen, weren't that interested in shifting power. But really what we are talking about is a shift in how power is distributed within Irish society. The second value is that of diversity. I noticed when Gail put up her slide earlier on in terms of views that people might have on whether or not they wanted more young people or more women. Maybe just so you didn't include it on the slide, Gail, but no one was asked, would you like to see an African woman? No one was asked, would you like to see a traveller member of our parliament or representing you? I saw in the Twitter sphere there earlier on while I was listening to some of the contributions, the idea of 199 shades of green, and maybe that's part of what we want to bring into our politics. Because we've never had a traveller elected to our parliament, which I find is astonishing, neither a man nor a woman. And the last time we had a Muslim elected to our parliament was Dr. Banji in the 1990s. We've certainly never had an African woman or a Muslim woman. And most of our politics, as someone alluded to earlier on, is done by people who, like me, are middle class. And I think what our members really believe is that democracy is better when we hear more voices and different views. And sadly, that's not the case in Ireland, either in politics or in wider public life. We mentioned already that there are such a small number elected to the Parliament, 15%, that there are only 2 women elected or appointed to the full Cabinet, and we're honoured to have one of them here with us today. But also in the media, in news and current affairs media, we did a survey this time last year, and what we found was that fewer than 1 in 4 voices in the news and current affairs and RT, News Talk and Today FM belonged to women. It was massively male-dominated. In education, an interesting statistic about the capacity of women, where we know that women dominate the education sphere. 85% of primary school teachers are women. Only 63% of primary school principals are women. So there is a gap at every point that you look at in Irish society. And in business, in the boardrooms of our top 100 companies, only 8% of the seats belong to women. And in a recent survey by the OECD, that put us between India and Egypt for our poor performance. Neither country particularly known or celebrated for its progress in women's rights. Couple more minutes, I can do that, that's fine, don't worry. I had another half an hour planned, but there is, I would say, one bright spot, and I'll talk about that and then I'll go on to say what our proposals are for encouraging more women to get involved in politics. And that is that civil society, associational democracy, that women dominate civil society groups across Ireland. They make up almost 2/3 of board positions and senior directorate positions in civil society organisations. And civil society today in Ireland is an extremely large, cohesive and well-organised body. It employs around 100,000 people, part-time and full-time, and it has an income of around €6 billion. So it's making a massive contribution to our economy. And just to bring that to life for you, one of our member organisations is called Longford Women's Link, and they are actually the biggest employer in Longford town. I'm aware of the fact that one of the great historians on the women's movement in Ireland is one of the experts who will be addressing you later on. And Yvonne Gallagher would tell you that it was in the 70s really that Irish women's movement and civil society took off. The Women's Council was founded, 79, we had the first National Rape Crisis Centre. And from that point on, women have made their voice heard through the mechanism of civil society because they felt excluded from the structures, the very male structures that existed within our parliament. And the civil society also includes Concern, Trócaire, St Vincent de Paul, Barnardo's, lots of other groups like that. So, yeah, we have, nicely timed, we have 4 recommendations. The first one you've heard already this morning, and that is that we would amend the Women in the Home clause. The second one is that there should be a principle inserted into the Constitution to recognise and promote active citizenship by women and men. The third one is that there should be a principle inserted into the Constitution which recognises and promotes the role of civil society in making our democracy richer. And the fourth one is a recommendation to include, and we're not specifying exactly how we think this should be done, you can have a discussion on that, but a direct democracy provision that gives citizens the power to initiate legislation, to shape legislation, to change legislation, and to be making strong decisions about their own lives and to shift power away from politicians. And I would say that we do agree with the principles that Professor Gallagher expressed earlier on in terms of, if that's part of the discussion you have, general equality measures. Thank you very much.